Desperation pushed Clara through the hotel's revolving door and into the rain. She had not planned to run. She had planned to leave, and the difference felt like a small, violent decision in her ribs. Water soaked the hem of her coat. The satchel swung against her hip. Behind her, Julian called. Clara, his voice held restraint and something raw that stopped her footfall for half a breath. The conflict was immediate. She wanted to leave the hallway that smelled of lemon polish and hotel coffee, and someone she could not unsee stood between her and the street. Clara's first steps out onto the curb were not careful. She moved with an intent that made passers-by glance over. The leather of her satchel left a wet crescent on her palm. She wanted to be somewhere else, anywhere that didn't have Julian Cross's name attached to it, but she also wanted him to explain himself. She had rehearsed the words she would say on the cab ride: practical, resolute, tidy. Desperation made her faster. She kept her head down so she would not have to watch his expression change. Julian's coat was a dark line across the hotel's marble when he came out. He pushed through the door without waiting for the bell to finish ringing. He was taller than most men by the curb. His trench coat clung to shoulders that had no business being wet, and his hands moved with the careful economy Clara had learned to notice. He did not shout. He simply put one long stride between them and reached out. "Clara," he said again, "closer now, Don Tigo." The name sounded like a question and a demand at once. She did not turn her face to him. Instead, she reached for the umbrella rack by the door and tried to catch a taxi. Her fingers trembled as she tapped the window of a waiting cab, then let go as if the taxi would pull a secret she did not want revealed. That tremble calmed into something edged, a new emotion taking over. Anger. Anger flared because she had asked for simple honesty and got excuses. Anger burned because the conversation they had just had in the suite had ended with nothing settled and too many doors left open. Her jaw set. Julian stepped under the canopy and caught her sleeve. He did not touch the satchel. He only closed the small gap between her coat and his hand. That contact made her stop. She pulled back. "Don't touch me," she said. "Clara, listen." He lowered his voice so that it did not carry to the doorman. "Please. One night." "Stay." The plea cracked at the last syllable and sealed something fragile in the air. The doorman, Leon, opened the hotel door partway and looked out. He wore the city's standard patience. His voice was soft and practical. "Miss Hayes, it's pouring. A taxi." Clara pushed off his fingers. "No taxi." "I'm leaving." Her words were clipped. She took 2 steps and then stopped because Julian was in front of her, steady and impossibly present. The rain hit her face. It left tiny stinging tracks across her cheek where salt and cold and worry mixed. Clara fumbled with the pendant at her throat, an old silver disc threaded on a thin chain. The metal slid over her fingers and caught the hotel light. Julian's eyes tightened at the sight. He bent slightly as if something within him had recognized the pendant and not simply the shape of metal. For a moment she thought a memory had passed behind his eyes. "Where did you get that?" he asked, voice low. The question arrived like a small theft. Clara did not answer immediately. She clutched the chain with 2 fingers and felt the metal's cooling surface. Anger shifted into doubt. Had she misread his tone that afternoon, the promises that felt like threadbare patches on something torn? Doubt narrowed her vision. She looked at him as if testing whether the man she faced was the same one who sat with paper cups and unreadable hands in the boardroom. "It's mine." The line was small. She added, "It doesn't matter where I got it." That line, aimed to cut, failed in the rain. Julian's jaw worked. His fingers closed on air as if wanting to take the pendant from her and then thinking better of it. The change in his face was fast. Control thinning into something that showed across his cheekbones and the small scar at his eyebrow. Maya, the night clerk, appeared in the vestibule with an umbrella in hand. She had heard the exchange through the glass and came out because hotel policy demanded intervention when guests seemed likely to cause trouble. Maya's presence put a thin, bright seam between private argument and public spectacle. "Sir, Mayam, please," she said, bringing a hospitality calm that made Clara resentful and Julian almost apologetic. The doorman's expression hardened slightly, not at the couple but at the possibility of headlines, and Leon offered a taxi's license plate number. "I can call it, sir." His voice implied that the hotel wanted no loud scenes on its steps. Julian's eyes flicked to the street, then back to Clara. The stakes moved from private to public. The presence of staff converted the argument into a series of choices that had witnesses. Clara backed up one step, and the rain filled the space around her. She remembered, suddenly and unbidden, a morning years earlier. Rain against a classroom window while a teacher closed a gradebook, the sting of being left without explanation. Her fingers tightened on the pendant, with the memory sharp and ridiculous in its particularity. The memory did not float as an abstract thing. It pushed her to act. She turned to the cab stand and started again toward the curb. Julian moved faster. He reached the umbrella first and snapped it open. His hand brushed her shoulder to steady the frame. The umbrella was small, a tight black dome. It made him look both absurd and urgent beneath the hotel's canopy. The action was neither grand nor theatrical. It was precise and described more than a line ever could. He wanted to shelter her, embarrassingly and immediately. That small mercy unbalanced the argument. "Clara," he said, more stern now, "Dunty, pull away. Not like this." Not when... He stopped because there were words he could say in full and still keep his dignity intact. She answered with a rapid sequence of sentences that came out clipped. "You can ask me to stay because you feel guilty. You can make safety out of a plea. Julian, this has to mean something or it means nothing." The two of them exchanged 3 quick lines, one after the other, full of accusation and refusal and a thin opening for explanation. The back and forth moved fast enough to make Maya and Leon look at each other. Julian's hand went to his hair and dragged fingers through damp strands. Her, I know it's not enough." The words landed like a dropped coin. He did not elaborate. Clara could see the brief crumple at the corner of his mouth that betrayed private grief. That small failure of armor shifted her anger. Anger softened into a cold ache. She could feel the change in how she held her shoulders. A cab pulled up and the driver glanced at the couple. The presence of the street and its indifferent drivers forced the hotel staff into action. Leon opened the trunk of the taxi as if to suggest a ready exit. Maya held out another umbrella like an offered truce. External events kept arriving every few paragraphs of the night. A line of headlights, the scrape of a suitcase wheel, a pedestrian hurrying past with a newspaper sheltering their head. Each arrival pressed at Clara's decision. Julian spoke again, this time more quietly. "Clara, He dropped to his knees on the wet pavement. The motion was sudden and absolute. Rain spattered his face and pooled at the seam of his trousers. He did not kneel to beg about ownership or public image. He knelt because the control that carried him through meetings had failed him and left only the need to keep this single person from walking away. Clara's breath caught. She had never expected him to kneel. She felt the world reduced to 2 bodies and the wet cobblestones, and then to the pendant that flashed against her throat. The kneel was the chapter's peak in motion and in vulnerability. Her own body betrayed her, her feet rooted. Her hand lifted to cover the pendant without thinking, fingers trembling. "Please, Julian, stay tonight. Not for the company, for me." For he could not finish. The sentence dissolved into a raw sound. The pleading was not performative. It was a collapse of decorum. Clara answered with a line that came out level. "Julian, you can ask me to fix you." The words were a boundary. They were also a hand extended in a different way. She stepped back toward the hotel door. "I want to be used as a bandage." The sentence came out cleaner than she felt. He looked up at her then, rain spattering his face like an uninvited reveal. "I don't want you as a bandage. I want you to see me. I can carry him anymore." The name he did not say hung heavy in the space between them. Clara heard it indirectly in the way his voice curdled. Her throat tightened. Doubt turned to a new feeling, an ache that was not anger but the brittle part of sadness. She did not fall for him. She did not forgive him. She simply heard the truth sliding into the street in fragments. The revelation changed the terms of the argument. Julian's posture made it clear he was not negotiating control. He was conceding a private defeat. Maya stepped forward then, holding the lobby door open. Ms. Hayes, the kitchen is closed, but you can wait upstairs. It is dry. No obligation, her voice was careful. The sentence was an offer that changed the physical options in front of Clara. Leon closed the umbrella with a soft click as he moved to pick it up from the stair. He did not look at Julian with scorn. He looked at him with an expression of professional neutrality that nonetheless made Julian straighten. Clara hesitated on the threshold. The elevator light blinked above, and for a moment she watched it and saw a path that did not require explanation. Her legs wanted to move. The hotel lobby felt suddenly like a theater where choices were announced by stage cues. Julian remained on his knees in the rain, a figure carved into the street by cold and need. She could have walked away on impulse and left the night to clarify itself. She could step back inside and set terms. The decision point surged like a physical pressure under her ribs. She turned her face up to the canopy and said nothing at first. The silence was a sentence in itself. Then she took 2 steps toward him and placed the umbrella between them. It was an action that kept her autonomy intact. She did not touch his shoulder. She did not kneel with him. She did not accept his plea as a contract. She only sheltered them both for a moment. The shift in her posture, shielding not surrendering, mattered. Julian rose quickly from the pavement and tucked his hands into his coat, as if to hide their dampness. He looked at her and said, "That's all I need. One night. Let me explain in full." His voice had steadied. The request was not ownership. It was a bid for explanation and presence. Clara drew a small line of air through her teeth. One night then. But I set the rules now. Her voice supplied the boundary. She named one condition: privacy, no guests, no callers. She named a second: honesty, not excuses. Julian's mouth tightened and then gave. He nodded. I will be honest. No calls, no visitors. The exchange had the rhythm of negotiation and the finality of a conditional truce. They walked back inside under a single small black umbrella. Water slid off the hem of his coat onto the marble floor and left a dark arc. Maya closed the door and guided them past the reception desk, where the night clerk logged their names, not their argument. Leon took the umbrella from the mat later and glanced back at the elevator. It was his action, picking up an object and returning it to the rack, that stamped the night's choice as provisional rather than permanent. In the lobby, Clara set her satchel down and took off her coat with hands that had steadied. The pendant lay flat against her chest and caught the warm lobby light. She kept her head down and listened to Julian speak in small, clear sentences about the things she already partly knew and partly feared. He offered specifics: a letter he had found, a call he had missed, a flight cancelled. He did not plead for forgiveness with grand phrases. Instead, he listed facts and moments, admitting the details he had ignored and the times he had failed to say the simple thing she had asked for. The truth. She interrupted him twice with short, sharp lines. "Where were you when she said once. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said again. They argued in tight bursts, 6 short lines that landed like measured blows. Listeners in the lobby could not have missed the pattern of accusation and answer. But the content stayed between them. Each line revealed more about the late afternoons he had missed, the messages he'd left unread, the small domestic absences that add up to a life gone hollow. Maya handed Clara a towel from behind the desk when the conversation paused. The action was domestic and precise and changed the tone in a small domestic way. A towel is not a metaphor, it is a tool. Clara took it, dried her hair, and felt the cool hotel air against her neck. The physical act did more to steady her than any sentence. An hour passed at the edge of the night like a small, slow wave. They moved from the lobby into a suite because Julian insisted on privacy and because Clara required space to hear details without other people leaning in. The elevator ride was a place where neither spoke. The silence was an active decision. When the doors opened on the suite, keys still warm in his hand, the city beyond the window looked vast and wet. The suite smelled faintly of cedar and lemon, and Clara folded her hands behind her back to hold a composure she could see fraying. Once inside, Julian closed the door and sat on the edge of the couch, hands together. He did not pace. He made an inventory of the facts. The discovery of an old postcard, a misplaced photograph, a voicemail that had not been deleted. He spoke in short phrases designed to map the damage. Clara listened and asked questions with quick, precise edges. Her questions guided him to specifics and forced him to name things he had let go unsaid. Mid-conversation, an unexpected detail surfaced. Julian produced a small photograph folded into his wallet. He set it on the coffee table. Clara saw the angle of someone else's hand in the photo and recognized a bracelet she had once worn. The twist altered her sense of what she knew. The object she thought ordinary carried a linkage she had not expected. Her face closed. A new shift moved through her. Suspicion gave way to comprehension and then to a wary tenderness. The room rearranged itself around that photograph. They spoke until the rain thinned into a steady mist and then into a light that suggested dawn. The night's miniature climax, Julian kneeling in the rain, had been resolved into a conditional truce and an agreement to remain for one night with rules. Clara kept repeating the terms aloud, making sure they were clear and enforceable. Julian agreed and then, in a voice that flickered, said something she had not expected. "Thank you for not walking away." The sentence was both admission and request. Clara did not answer with a sentimental phrase. She moved to the window, wrapped the towel around her shoulders, and watched cars slide past in the wet street below. She felt the exhaustion of decision settle into her limbs. She had made a temporary choice. She had not surrendered a future. The elevator hummed in the hall below and carried the morning up to them in a thin mechanical breath. Downstairs, Leon walked to the steps as the rain eased and picked up the black umbrella that had been left behind. He set it against the banister and glanced up at the suite windows. The umbrella was wet and heavy. He ran a practiced hand along the metal frame and then stood it in the rack where it belonged. The simple retrieval of a forgotten object closed the night with a concrete action. The umbrella would be there if someone needed it again, and its presence would mark the place where two people had reached a fragile agreement. Clara, in the suit, felt the city's light bleed over the horizon and turned from the window when Julian's voice called her name quietly to say he would make coffee. She answered with a single sentence. "Tomorrow we begin with honesty." The line was specific, placed as a condition. It was not a promise. At the hotel steps, Leon set the umbrella upright and watched the elevator doors close in the glass above. He saw a movement where a woman adjusted the pendant at her throat and a man, damp and still, moved toward the kitchen. The doorman closed his hand around the umbrella's handle and walked back inside. The morning found an object left behind, a small sign that something had been postponed rather than ended. Clara did not sleep much that night, but she stayed. The decision to stay was a contained, deliberate act. Not a surrender, not a capitulation, but a choice to hear facts and to test whether truth could become a basis for something like trust. When dawn came, the umbrella on the steps marked the night's ledger. The final sound that closed the chapter was the elevator's soft ding and the quiet pulling of a card key as the suite door opened again. Leon's hand on the umbrella was the last concrete movement the listener would hold onto as the chapter finished. The SUV's brakes barked on wet concrete and Julian cross-slammed his passenger door open before the engine had cooled. Fear pushed Clara's feet faster. She reached the jet steps with her hand on the rail, and the satchel heavy against her hip. "Clara, wait," Julian shouted, voice rough enough that airport staff turned. The central problem sat between them in plain metal and law. Clara planned to leave, and someone in that SUV had the power to stop her. Clara did not drop her carry-on. She had run out of the hotel's revolving door the night before with water on her hem. She had run past Julian's voice then too, the memory a blunt thing. The earlier incident, the hotel door, the rain, Julian calling Clara, was not a rumor now. It was the reason the plane's steps were crowded and why a legal packet could be produced at a moment's notice. Fear hardened into a thin, quick anger when Marcus leaned from the SUV with a leather folder in his hand. Marcus stepped forward and named the airport manager, pulling him aside with a professional, urgent voice. "This is private business. Clear the perimeter, Marcus." His tone pushed on the edge of command. Clara's jaw tightened. She looked at the 100-foot fuselage and then at Julian. "Don't touch my bag," she said, and the line cut through the early morning like a blade. Julian's face was wet at the temples from the drive. His trench collar was up, water beading along the seam. He kept his distance, but his eyes tracked Clara the way a person tracks a receding train. He did not raise his voice again yet. Clara folded her fingers around the satchel strap, the way someone clamps a steering wheel. The emotion in her moved, fear first, then a quick flare of defiance. She took one step up the plane stairs and Marcus set his briefcase on the tarmac. Marcus opened it with a practiced flick and pulled out a thick document stamped with corporate seals. He did not look at Clara when he spoke. "Ms. Hayes, this packet contains the clause that will activate unless we reach an agreement now." The manager, Evelyn, hovered behind him, eyes shifting to the hangar entrance. The presence of an official legal document converted what had been an argument into a nearly mechanical threat. Privacy terms that could generate public accusations if Clara stepped off the plane and spoke. Clara gloved her hand over the chain at her throat and kept her gaze level. "Marcus, show me," she said. Her words were short. The legal clause was concrete, written in numbered paragraphs and signature lines. But Marcus slid a folded personal note toward her with the papers instead of reading the dry legalese. She unfolded it with fingers that shook. The note was not a corporate form. Julian's handwriting tilted and cramped in two places. A phrase was underlined in a dry ink that had run with rain. "If you cannot stay for reasons of safety, tell me exactly where you will go. I will not let them hurt you." Those words shifted the issue. This was no longer only legal leverage. The packet contained a personal protection line and a set of instructions Julian had quietly arranged. Clara felt the second emotion shift. Anger at being managed, then a small, unsettled warmth at the private concern. She read the hand-made line twice, then folded the paper back over. "Julian," Lena shouted from the hangar mouth, breathless with pavement dust. Clara's sister had tracked her like a thread through the city and now arrived with a phone ready and a face that refused calm. Lena reached the foot of the steps and put a hand on Clara's elbow. "Clara, what are you doing?" "Lena." Her voice carried a mix of relief and alarm. Clara turned to Lena. "Lena, leave me alone." She answered, but she did not step down. The external events compounded. A photographer at the far gate raised a camera and a shutter clicked like a pistol. A single flash tracked across the wet hangar floor. A single image could start a story that Marcus's documents promised to finish. The new pressure moved Clara's anger into calculation. She could board, be unseen, and go. Or she could stay and force a conversation that would be filmed. Julian's voice came low enough for only a few people. "Clara, please." He kept his hands at his sides. "This is messy. But I can let you go without saying something first." He did not offer an explanation. He offered a pause. That pause was an active demand in itself. Clara felt the pulse in her throat and answered with a third emotion shift. Defiance sharpened into negotiation. Marcus read the clause aloud because he needed witnesses. paragraph 13. Automatic confidentiality and non-disparagement. Violation causes immediate public listing of an alleged altercation. Signatures required within 12 hours or we will publish. The words were plain, and the manager, Evelyn, nodded toward the line of airport personnel who could corroborate whatever Marcus claimed. The hangar opacity had changed. Legal language became leverage with personnel at the ready. Clara slapped the packet down onto her rolling suitcase. You would publish lies to keep me here, she demanded. Her voice did not break into a dramatic cry. It held the clipped, rational edge she used when she needed people to understand exact choices. Julian, is that true? She asked, looking at him directly. Julian's fingers flexed. He pressed a thumb into the small scar above his left eyebrow without seeming to touch it. We never planned to lie, he said. He did not say, I will not allow it or any trumpeted defense. He said it the way a man states a fact. We prepared for the worst. For your safety and for ours, he named safety the same way a mechanic names a tool. Clara heard the precision and felt it as a pressure. Lena stepped forward and used 2 short lines to change the thermal of the scene. Julian, you can threaten my sister, she said. Clara, get on the plane. We'll sort this later. Lena kept her hand on Clara's arm like a literal anchor. The presence of another family voice introduced a new variable. An ally who did not negotiate with the same vocabulary as corporate counsel. Julian shifted toward Marcus. Marcus, this is not the time for posturing. Bring the packet down, leave the publicity out, Marcus, as jaw set. He held the folder like someone holding a contract that could snap closed on a neck. Cross, the clause exists and it will be enforced if she speaks in public. Marcus, that's all. His reply was efficient, almost clinical. The tension ratcheted. Clara read the folded personal note again, while the hangar hummed with engines and a far voice did a call sign over a radio. The note's sentence about letting anyone hurt her made the stakes feel immediate and physical. Clara felt her knees anchor to the stairs, her hands folded around the chain at her throat until her fingertips paled. The physical cue marked an internal shift from argument to a need for tangible action. A photographer as Flash asked again, closer now. Someone shouted, nonverbal, a distant command, and the hangar's perimeter light clicked into a brighter wash. An event arrived. A courier in a black jacket jogged up with a package and handed it to Marcus. Marcus flicked through its contents and then took out a thin white envelope with a logo Clara did not recognize. The courier left before anyone could ask his name. The arrival was quick and concrete, and it sharpened the problem. Whatever Marcus now had could widen the legal threat. Julian stepped closer to Clara with only the space of 3 feet between them. He did not reach up. He simply lowered his voice so only Lena and Clara could hear. Clara, I know what you fear, he said. The word, fear aloud, and it landed not as a label but as a recognition of what had pushed her to the steps. I know you think staying will mean control, not care. I was wrong about how to keep you safe. I won't do that again. His hands were at his sides, not reaching, the posture of someone who depracticed restraint. Clara's reply was a 2-line rhythm. Julian, I don't need your protection if it means my choices vanish. I want to be bought or silenced, not by you, not by Marcus. Her syllables were precise. She put Julian's name on the hard beats so listeners could track the rhythm. Her stance shifted. A decision was forming, not from fear but from condition. The clerical papers rustled as Marcus cleared his throat. Mr. Cross, if Ms. Hayes does not sign an interim agreement, public disclosure is possible as a defensive measure. Evelyn moved a half, stepped closer to Marcus as if ready to take direction. The hangar felt like the inside of a hinge. Actions on one side created a closing motion. That was when Julian did the thing no one expected. He dropped to his knees on the wet concrete, under the plane's shadow, and did not wait for permission. The gesture cut the air. He put his palms on the hangar floor as if steadying himself, and then he looked up at Clara. Clara, I'm asking you to hear me, he said. Stay one night. Talk to me. Let me be honest, without lawyers between us, the visual was a rupture. The rich man, the CEO, undone in a public space with puddled light around his knees. The immediate beat was raw. Marcus' mouth tightened. Lena's fingers gripped Clara's sleeve. The photographer's camera clicked again, closer this time, a small mechanical insistence. Julian's knees sent a spray of water. His cufflinks caught the light with a small gold flash. The climactic peak of the hangar arrived precisely as the outline predicted. A public surrender of control that forced a choice. 3 voices rushed against the silence that followed. Marcus, stand up. Cross Lena. Julian, get up this instant. Clara, nothing for a full beat while the world around them made concrete noises. A plane's auxiliary power unit ticked, a distant engine idled, a courier's footsteps receded. The silence itself was a physical thing, like a door held open. Clara's hands were steady on the strap of her satchel. Julian, she said, slowly, deliberately, if you kneel and ask me to stay, then agents are still in charge. If you want me to stay, start by telling me what really happened the night at the hotel. She used the hotel scene. His night call when she ran into the rain, as a reference, naming a past event rather than painting an emotion. The demand turned the public plea into a test. Words instead of spectacle. Julian closed his eyes for a breath and then opened them. At the hotel, I kept myself from telling you everything because I thought I could protect you that way. I didn't tell you the full investigation. I'm sorry I hid things, Clara. His phrase did not aim to win pity. It aimed to change the terms of the encounter. The emotion between them bent from spectacle toward negotiation. The argument that followed was quick, the rapid exchange required when 2 characters clash. Marcus, Julian. Remove the clause from circulation for now, Marcus answered. I can authorize that without cross signature, Julian replied. Then sign it and I'll explain, Marcus shot back. You are asking me to drop a legal tool because your conscience changed. Julian, yes. Because I'm asking for her, not for the company, Marcus. That is not how we handle external exposure. The back and forth had the formal snap of people defending institutions against personal impulses. Clara watched them. She felt anger ghost through her, anger at being the fulcrum of corporate procedure, and anger at Julian for making decisions for her without asking. Her mouth pressed into a line. She breathed slowly to keep from answering in heat. Then she spoke in a way that changed the stakes. Marcus, drop the clause now or I walk. No signatures, no press, no deals tonight. Either you make him choose to protect me without paper, or I go. Her sentence required Marcus to act on principle or procedure. Marcus looked to Julian, then away. He had been in this role before. The man who translated an employer's needs into enforceable action. His hand slid into his pocket and his thumb brushed a phone. He lingered in hesitation long enough to make everyone feel the weight of his next move. The external event arrived. Marcus typed a terse message and sent it. Lena watched the screen, level glow on his face. The courier who'd approached earlier returned and stopped at the hangar edge. He carried nothing outwardly dramatic now. His presence simply underscored that the world outside had begun to move. The mini cliffhanger in the middle of the chapter came when Marcus looked up and said, I will withdraw immediate enforcement for 24 hours, provided Cross signs a temporary waiver agreeing to a public statement with Ms. Hayes. The offer was a bridge and also a trap. It allowed safety while leaving future exposure possible. For listeners, the question hung, will Clara accept? Will Julian sign? Clara's voice was quiet, nearly a whisper but clear in the hangar. I will not be silenced. I will not sign anything that keeps me from speaking if I need to. The line forced Julian to make a visible choice. Julian's face shifted. The control he usually wore as a mask slipped. He reached down, took the offered pen, and tapped it against the folder before signing. The pen's click was an auditory anchor. Then Julian did a small, specific action that shifted perception. He took a folded page from Marcus' packet and extended it toward Clara. It was not the legal clause. It was a detailed note explaining which company personnel had been told what about the hotel night and which internal safety measures had been activated. "Read this," he said. "If you stay, talk to me on those terms. If you go, I will respect your decision, but you will not be silenced by us." He named consequences and gave her a document that mapped the truth he had withheld. Clara read the page while Lena paced behind her with hands on her hips. The paper listed names, times, and a single bullet point that said, "No intent to smear." The specificity changed the power balance. The public threat lost some of its edge when confronted with paper that laid out protections and admissions. Clara's fear thinned into a wary consideration. She weighed the risks like a person weighing banknotes. She made a clear choice. "I will stay tonight if you talk openly, and if no one from your team threatens me with publicity again," she said. She listed 2 conditions: honesty and the removal of immediate legal threats. "I will stay only under those conditions," she added, and the sentence ended the argument by converting it into terms. Marcus watched her sign a small receipt, acknowledging the temporary pause in enforcement, and withdrew with a curt nod. He handed the envelope he had received earlier to Julian and walked toward the SUV. The courier, who had been a peripheral movement in earlier beats, now stepped away down the service road with a small black envelope in his hand. The courier's exit was the final concrete movement that closed the chapter's immediate conflict. On the plane steps, Clara paused and looked back at Julian, who had risen and adjusted his wet coat. Lena stayed at the bottom of the stairs with her phone against her ear, dialing a number to inform someone that Clara would not be leaving alone. The external world continued to hum. The auxiliary power unit clicked again. The hangar lights shifted with a maintenance schedule. The photographer lowered his camera and moved away. Those external motions made the decision feel less private, more anchored in reality. Clara slid her satchel strap over her shoulder and stepped into the cabin. The attendant closed the plane door with a soft mechanical whisper. On the tarmac, Marcus sent a short message, and the courier vanished down the service road, the black envelope tucked under his arm. The elapsed decisions had resolved the chapter's immediate conflict. Clara had not been taken away by force. Julian had performed an unguarded act. Marcus had withdrawn enforcement for the moment. The chapter closed on a precise, physical beat. Clara was on the aircraft, the door closing, and the courier's figure receding into the brightening morning. The hangar smelled of jet fuel and wet concrete. Julian stood in that smell and watched the plane's windows blink as the cabin lights came on. He had chosen a path that exposed him publicly in a way he seldom allowed. Lena watched him with suspicion and a slow, evaluating anger that would not be resolved here. Marcus drove the SUV onto the service road without a word. The man with the black envelope was out of sight, and the envelope's contents promised the next ripple. Julian picked up the thin page he had handed Clara and refolded it before putting it into his inside pocket. He watched the plane's door click shut and then lifted his head to the sky, as if checking whether the day would hold. He had surrendered control for an hour and, in doing so, risked revealing more than he meant to. The decision was concrete. He had signed a waiver, he had asked for honesty. He had let Clara choose. The chapter ends on this physical closure, the metal door sealed, the courier's silhouette a dark comma on the road, and not on a promise or a speech. Outside, the morning light pooled on puddles and painted a thin stripe of gold along the hangar edge. Inside that stripe, Julian folded his hands and touched the gold cufflink on his wrist. The scene's last movement was recorded by the hangar's cameras and by Lena's phone, and the images would exist whether he wanted them to or not. The concrete beat that closed the chapter was the plane's door locking and the courier turning a corner, carrying a sealed black envelope away from them all. Julian dropped to his knees on the slick curb, rain soaking the hem of his trench coat as he reached for the revolving door. Desperation pulled through him in the only language Julian had left. Public, visible, impossible to ignore. Clara froze with one hand on the brass bar. There was a taxi idling to her right, passenger door open, engine ticking in the rain. The immediate conflict was simple and brutal. She had a way out, and he was making a scene to stop her. Clara watched his hands stretch, felt the wet air on her face, and heard a new sound, Julian's voice, raw and small against the city's rain. "Clara," he said. The name landed between them like a demand. She had planned this night. She had packed a single bag, a plane ticket, and a short resignation note folded into the lining of her satchel. She had been ready to step onto a jet and vanish. Now the choice hung over the threshold in the raw, wet sound of his plea. She had not learned to panic on the curb. Clara's jaw tightened. She remembered the hangar at dawn, the SUV's brakes barking on wet concrete, the moment she felt the weight of a decision press against her ribs. That morning at the hangar had not been a mistake. It had been the plan. Tonight was the moment to follow through. Julian, Clara, holding his name like a wall. Her voice was steady, "You can tee." She did not finish. A valet's gloved hand slid between them. Martin, the doorman, had been on duty. "Miss Hayes, please." "Martin," his voice low. He stepped forward and spread his arms, aiming to shepherd her back inside. "Let's keep this private." "Come inside, miss." His tone carried the professional insistence of someone who had seen hotel scenes before and wanted them contained. "Martin." "No." Julian answered from the curb. His voice broke once and then regained a brittle pitch. "Let her decide." He folded his hands as if to hide trembling fingers. The valet, Eddie, steadied Clara's satchel to guide her away. In the struggle, the leather flaps slipped and a boarding pass slid free. The thin paper slapped the pavement and the rain opened on the ink. Clara's resignation note followed, soaked at the corner, the handwriting visible where she had written, "I can be the woman who covers him." The sentence read like evidence. A passerby bent down and cupped the boarding pass with wet fingers. Phones lit, faces turned. A small crowd formed in seconds. The city liked a spectacle after midnight. Is she leaving him? Someone asked, "Is that Mr. Cross?" Another voice answered. The risk was no longer private. Clara grabbed at her satchel and the boarding pass, but Eddie's hand stayed on the leather. "Miss, please." "Eddie." He tried to move her back into the lobby. "Let us take care of this inside." "Sir, please stand back." The valet said Julian's name as if to remind him he could be reasoned with. Julian pushed himself up from the curb. Rain plastered his hair. He walked slowly, the hem of his coat dragging wet shapes on the pavement. He stepped into the line between Clara and the waiting taxi. "Clara, you have my attention," he said, voice low. He did not raise his hands. He did not try to pull her. He simply blocked the way. Clara kept her eyes on the taxi and then on the revolving door. Her pulse ticked in her throat. Her feet were already moving. The threshold felt small and large at once. She thought of the resignation note, the hangar, the ticket. She thought of 2 earlier nights. The night she had burst into his suit carrying grief like an accusation. And the night at the hangar when Julian had almost thrown himself at an engine. Those were facts she could not rewrite. "Clara." Julian again. He spoke her name like a lit fuse. "Why are you leaving?" His question was short. It demanded a reason that would make him stop kneeling on the wet curb. She spat one short sentence. "Because I can't be what you need me to be." Her hands tightened on the satchel. "Clara, please." "Julian." A small hotel manager moved into the doorway and his voice tightened. "Miss Hayes." The manager called. "Miss Hayes." For the hotel's reputation, he stopped when Julian met his eyes. "Mr. Cross," the manager said, naming the man he recognized from headlines. "If you continue this, I'll have to ask security to remove you both." The manager's name, Mies Alvarez, came out steadier than her face suggested. She was trying to reclaim a private moment for the hotel's policies. The crowd's murmurs rose. Someone took a photo, another phone clicked video. Julian's expression changed in a fragment, a look Clara had seen twice before. A flinch that wasn't control, but the fear of a story taking over his life. That fear had ruled him in boardrooms. It had kept him distant in private. Now it pushed him to the curb. Clara, listen. Julian folded his hands and forced them open. His voice dropped. Listen to me. I know what people will say. I know how it will sound, but you'll hear me out, yes. He kept his eyes on her. He had not asked for much else in life lately. Just to be understood when he was raw. Clara hesitated. She had been clear with herself that night at the hangar. She had a plane, a job offer 2 continents away, a clean break. She had promised she would not stay for crumbs of apology. But Julian stood between the taxi and the revolving door like someone who had found a hard part of himself and refused to let it go. Eddie nudged her arm. Miss, please, Ms. Hayes. Mr. Cross asks you to come inside. He used both names to anchor the people watching. He wanted the scene contained. The resignation note lay on the pavement, lifted once in a gust and then beaten flat by rain. A puddle formed along the curb and the wet paper darkened. One corner of the note had a smudge where a tear had fallen earlier. Martin picked up the note with gloved fingers and read aloud without meaning to. I can be the woman who covers him, his voice carried. The crowd quieted like an audience waiting for the next line. Julian's face changed, his jaw clenched. He'd mistaken the meaning of her leaving. He had assumed it was fear of his public life. He had assumed she was tired of the edges of him. The line Martin read shifted the scene's meaning. She wasn't running because he was dangerous. She was running because she couldn't be his shield anymore. Julian moved forward, hands open. Clara, is that what you think? He asked. That I'm asking you to be a shield. He sounded incredulous and more exposed than he had ever allowed himself. Julian, she stopped. The valet's grip on the satchel tightened. Eddie's name came again. Miss Hayes, please. The hotel manager, Ms. Alvarez, stepped down 2 steps and called. Martin, get security on the line. Do it quietly. Her fingers dialed. An onlooker lifted a phone high. People are recording, she said. A boy's voice behind her added, he's a billionaire. She's a guest. This is juicy. The word juicy tore at Clara's skin. Julian's breath came harder. He looked at the note on the pavement, at the boarding pass, and then at Clara's face. The rain drew tracks down her cheeks. Her pendant flashed at her collarbone. The silver glinted when she moved. He had not noticed the pendant until now. It was a small piece of hammered silver on a thin chain, worn in a way that said it had been carried for years. Eddie, trying to diffuse the crowd, stooped and picked up the pendant when Clara's hand brushed it. He held it between a thumb and forefinger and turned it so that a detail caught the streetlight. There was an engraving on the back, a tiny set of initials, C. The valet's eyes widened. This looks like the pendant reported lost last winter. Eddie, what? Martin immediately. Mr. Cross lost a pendant. His tone changed. He stepped closer and shielded the pendant with his gloved hand as if the conversation could be contained. Clara's mouth opened. No, she said, that can tea. Her voice broke. The crowd leaned in. A woman in a raincoat from a staff meeting slipped forward. It was the Cross family locket, she said in a small voice. Mrs. Cross left with it the night of the funeral, and it never turned up in the house. Martin's eyebrows snapped up. Mies. Alvarez covered her hand with her mouth. If that's the family locket. Julian's face went taut. He took 2 steps closer. Where did you get that? He demanded. The question was sharp. He did not ask for explanations from strangers often. I found it in your suite once. Clara. Her throat tightened. She did not plan to reveal this. The memory of a night earlier returned with hard clarity. The room after a private wake, the drawer where she had found a small parcel wrapped in hotel tissue. The pendant inside and the careful choice to tuck it into her satchel, because she thought returning it the next day would be better. I was going to give it back. She said I was going to. Julian's mouth moved without sound. The crowd pressed. Someone whispered, he keeps mementos. Another voice asked whether Clara had taken it. Accusations jumped like stones. Clara Hayes, Julian, using her full name. He kept the formality like an anchor. Why did you take my mother's locket? His voice was low. The name of his mother hung unspoken. He had not used that name often in public. Clara's hands trembled. I didn't take it, Julian. I found it on your suit table after the wake. I meant to return it. I didn't plan to keep it. She the words in short strokes. Clara, tell them the truth, Julian. Though his voice was not an order but a plea. Tell them why you were leaving tonight. He forced himself to meet her eyes. She remembered the hangar again, the service breaks, the late call that had pulled her into his life. The night she had run into the suit after a wrong number and stayed long enough to learn that grief lived behind his control. I booked a flight because I thought leaving would be cleaner, she said. I thought if I left, it would stop being messy for you. But I never intended to take anything that wasn't mine, she swallowed. Clara Hayes does not take heirlooms, Julian. I was packing because I wanted to stop being the one who smooths edges for someone else. Her words stung him. A young journalist in the crowd murmured. They re-arguing over a locket and a resignation note. This will trend. Someone else hissed that if photos got out it could ruin everything. The manager, Ms. Alvarez, shouted into a phone. Security to the curb now. Quietly. No cameras in the lobby. Julian's face changed again. He was not the public man at this instant. The public had not written this version of him yet. He stepped closer so that he almost touched Clara. Rain soaked his collar. You thought leaving would protect me. He asked. You thought you could keep me from being dragged into whatever this becomes. He flinched at his own admission. Clara, I don't want you to protect me. I want you to tell me the truth so I can stop guessing. He searched her face as if a clear answer might stitch something back together. Clara hesitated and then stepped forward. Julian, I saw the pendant on your table after the funeral. I wrapped it because it was raining and I didn't want it to roll away. I was going to give it back in the morning. She pointed with her chin toward the revolving door. I didn't plan to catch you kneeling on a curb at midnight. Her words were short and factual. There was a pause that felt like an inhale. The crowd waited. Phones stopped for a breath. Julian exhaled. He looked at his hands, and then at the pendant in Eddie's fingers. You should have told me. He said simply, you should have given it back sooner. I think he stopped. He did not finish the sentence about guilt or reputation. He folded his hands and then unclenched them. Clara, I thought you were leaving because you were done with me. I thought you couldn't live with the public version of my life. I didn't think you would leave because you couldn't keep carrying the parts of me that are broken. He hated hearing it aloud. The valet, Eddie, nudged closer. Mr. Cross, Miss Hayes, he began, then stopped because the manager had signaled him to step back. Ms. Alvarez came onto the curb and said aloud to both of them, this must stop now. Privacy for the hotel. Her voice tried to pull the moment into a professional frame. Julian, Ms. Hayes, please come inside. We'll clear the area. Security will escort you. She gestured at two uniformed staff moving into place. Julian took a breath. He looked at Clara. He had to decide in that moment whether to let the scene be controlled by policy or by what he wanted. He stepped aside and offered his hand, not as an order but as a tool. Clara, he said, come inside. Talk to me. Now, his baritone cracked once and then steadied. Clara looked at his hand. The rain slid down both their faces. People held their phones like witnesses. She could still step toward the taxi, climb in, and vanish. The night had promised her an exit. She also could return to the lobby and face Julian under the hotel's watchful lights. She stepped forward and, with a single motion, accepted his hand. There was a small sound from the crowd. Someone laughed nervously. Martin opened the revolving door. Inside, please, he said. They moved through the glass into the lobby. The hotel's warm air hit their wet coats and steamed. Ms. Alvarez closed the door and signaled for the valet to keep the cameras at bay. Security formed a polite ring. The lobby's lighting was amber and controlled, a human attempt to make things ordinary again. Julian let go of her hand and sank into a club chair near the desk. He put his forehead into his palms for a moment and then lifted his head. "Clara," he said. His voice was low. "I need one honest hour. No cameras, no staff in the room, no managers. He searched for the right word and found none, just you and me. 1 hour. Tell me what you meant with that note. Tell me if you truly planned to leave for good." He kept his hands visible now. Clara sat opposite him. Her satchel lay by her feet. The pendant gleamed faintly at her throat. Eddie had placed it back on her lap with a courtesy gesture that suggested he wanted to return it and go. Martin hovered nearby with an umbrella folded at his side. She began in short sentences. "I booked a flight because the grief around you put me on edge. I thought I was part of a script I didn't want. I wrote the note because I felt trapped. The note said I couldn't be the woman who covers him, because I saw myself erasing my needs to make you whole. So I quit first to see what would happen if I wasn't there to smooth the jagged edges." She kept her voice even. Clara planned to be honest about that. Not to steal memories, not to take anything. She stopped. Julian listened. He nothing for a long moment. He rubbed his thumb against his cufflink. "Clara," he said finally, "I have been trying to control everything because the one thing I couldn't control was the way I broke when someone I loved wasn't whole. I thought if I controlled each public move, then no one would see the breaks. But you—" He stopped. "I see now that you've been protecting yourself from my breaks, not covering mine." He let the sentence rest. There was a knock at the far side of the lobby. A courier pushed through the doors with a small courier pouch and a tired manila envelope. The manager's face changed. "That came for Mr. Cross before you arrived, Ms. Alvarez." She took the pouch and opened it. Inside was a small set of papers Julian had been expecting, legal filings from his sister's estate. He had been waiting for them all week. The envelope slipped into Julian's hands like an intrusion. Julian's eyes narrowed as he read a single line of the first page. He drew a breath. "They've scheduled a hearing tomorrow at 9 a.m. he said. "If this goes public tonight, the board will use it as leverage." "I don't want them to use you as leverage, Clara. I want to let them." He looked at her with a new urgency. Clara folded her hands. "Then let's be honest in front of the board tomorrow," she said. "Let's go in with the truth. If you want me to stay, I'll stay on my terms. If you want me to go, I'll leave on mine. But don't make me leave out of silence." Her voice hit a note of tired firmness that had not been there at the curb. Julian nodded. "Clara Hayes," he said. He used her full name like a promise. "I will stop hiding pieces from you. I will stop expecting you to shield a version of me I can't keep hidden. But I need to know one thing. Are you staying because you feel obliged, or because you want to be here?" He was not asking for sacrifice anymore. He was asking for a reason. She looked at him for a long time. The lobby hummed with low housekeeping motors and distant taxi engines. Outside, the rain slowed to a fine mist. "I am staying because I don't want to be someone who runs from hard conversations," she said. "I'll stay because I want honesty from you. Not because I want to rescue you. Not because this cleans up headlines. Because I want the truth, and I need to be trusted with it." Her statement landed like a pact. Julian's shoulders dropped. He laughed once, hollowly. "That's a lot to ask of me." He looked down at his hands, and then back up. "Clara, I will try." He slid a small, unassuming object from his coat pocket and put it on the low table between them. A slim card with a number and a line written in a hand he didn't usually show. "If you stay, call this number at midnight. No managers, no staff. 2 nights a week, we sit and talk for an hour. Honest talk, no press. If you ever feel like that note again, tell me. If after a month you still feel the same, I'll book you a ticket myself, and I will not stop you. But I want to start here. Will you take that?" Clara read the card. She felt the weight of the pendant at her collarbone. She thought of the hanger's breaks. She thought of how the night had folded them into a public theater and then a private pact. She nodded once. Yes, she said. The word was a small, deliberate action. Outside, dawn threaded pale gold through the mist. Miss Alvarez stood and said, "I will clear the cameras now. Security will escort everyone discreetly. If you need privacy, Cross, we have a suit you can use for the hour." Her managerial voice carried a truce. Julian stood and offered her his arm. "Clara Hayes," he said softly, "thank you." He did not try to claim gratitude for saving his reputation. He merely acknowledged the risk she had taken. They walked toward the elevators together, flanked by Ms. Alvarez and a quiet security officer. The city around them resumed a normal night rhythm. Taxis, a food truck delivering warming boxes, a delivery cyclist bent low against the rain. People moved in and out of the frame as if they had not been part of the theater the night had offered. As the elevator doors closed, Eddie placed a small, dry towel into Clara's satchel that had been waiting in the valet stand. Martin folded the spare hotel umbrella and set it against the curb. A courier on the street called a driver for the waiting taxi. The hotel's machinery began to smooth the night back into routine. In the suite, the rain left tracks on the windows. Julian closed the door and turned the lock. He did not call the press. He did not send a statement. He sat on the couch and looked at Clara. "Clara Hayes," he said again. "If I falter." He stopped. She stood and took off her wet coat. She placed the pendant in the palm of her hand and then reached out and fastened it around his wrist, not returning ownership but creating a shared object. A small loop of shared responsibility. "Then tell me," she said. "Dante asked me to erase my needs to make you safe." Her voice was plain. Julian wrapped his hand around the pendant on his wrist and closed his fingers. He did not make promises he could not keep. He offered instead a name. "Clara Hayes," he said, and then he spoke more quietly. "Stay tonight. Stay until morning. We'll face the hearing together tomorrow. I'll stand with you when it matters." His words were concrete actions. Stay tonight, face the hearing tomorrow, stand together. Clara watched him choose those specific actions and felt a shift that was not magic but a slow, practical mending. She sat beside him. The night eased into a small orbit of honesty and negotiation. They spoke in short sentences. They laid out practical decisions. They made arrangements for the morning. They argued in 3 quick bursts about legal counsel and who would speak first, and then they stopped and arranged the list on Julian's phone. Their argument had 3 rapid exchanges where their voices snapped and then softened. The pattern felt like living. Later, when the first pale light hit the street and a hotel cleaner pushed a cart past the window, Clara stepped to the door with her satchel. She slipped the boarding pass into a small trash bin, folded the resignation note and burned the words in a small, careful way inside the suit's metal ashtray. She did not keep the note as an artifact. She crumpled it and placed the pieces in the bin. Julian watched from the couch, hands folded. He looked worn and not the man who polished his image in press photos. He looked like someone who had been awake too many nights and had finally decided to stop pretending the cracks could be hidden. Clara walked to the window and unlatched it a crack. The air smelled like wet stone and coffee shops opening. She rested her fingertips on the cool metal. "Julian," she said, 1 hour at midnight. "Honest talk 2 nights a week. If after 30 days I still feel like leaving, you will buy my ticket and I will go. If you let me leave now, I'll leave with no grudges. Those are my terms." Her voice was plain and final in a way that did not demand drama. He nodded. "I will keep that. I'll call you at midnight, and I will stand at that hearing tomorrow with you. Not for you. With you." He the last 3 words slowly. Clara slid the pendant from his wrist and put it back on her chain. She left his wrist free, a deliberate motion. She took her coat. She tied the satchel strap across her chest. She stepped to the door and opened it. Outside on the lobby step, Martin closed the umbrella behind her. "Miss Hayes." Cross has asked security to make sure there are no cameras beyond the doors for the morning. He wouldn't want this to turn. He stopped, because he did not know how to finish. Clara gave him a small thanks. She looked at Julian standing a step behind her, and then at the city waking up. The taxi driver shrugged and rolled his eyes at the spectacle. The rain had stopped. The pavement shone. She stepped back through the revolving door and into the early light. Julian followed her into the lobby and stayed at a short distance. Mies. Alvarez met them and closed the glass with a soft click. The hotel's routine swallowed the night and left a new arrangement between two people. Clara placed one foot inside the taxi, then turned to Julian, she said. He met her eyes. Yes, he answered. She offered one short instruction and one short request. Tomorrow at 9. Be there. Be honest. Julian nodded. I will be there. I will tell them the truth about the pendant. I will tell them the truth about us. The last phrase quietly. Clara closed the taxi door and watched Julian watch her go. The taxi pulled away. Martin closed the hotel door behind her. Julian did not try to stop the car. He stood on the curb as dawn light softened the wet pavement. Then he turned and walked inside, following the plan they had made. 1 hour at midnight, honest talks, a hearing at 9 a.m. And a choice made through action rather than silence. The chapter ends with a small concrete beat. The empty umbrella left on the curb, the pendant glinting in Clara's lap as the taxi bumped forward. And Julian stepping into the hotel lobby to call his lawyer and the board, starting a practical chain of events that would either stitch them together or let them part with clarity.